Hi, I'm Emily. Nice to meet you. Before I tell you my story, kindly hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I like to know where you're from. Now let's dive in. People always assumed I had it easy. Emily's just a housewife, they'd say, smiling politely while dismissing me in the same breath. They didn't know that the housewife they mocked had founded Ryan Technologies from the ground up. Every line of code, every department process, every initial hire me. Then I married Jeff Andrews. At first, he was charming, ambitious, polished. But ambition has an ugly side when it's paired with arrogance and entitlement. Over the years, his charm eroded, replaced with insults disguised as jokes, belittling remarks at dinners, and open ridicule in front of his friends. He told people I couldn't get a job if I tried, and that I was lucky he was willing to support me. The irony? Jeff was the VP of operations at my company. My company. He had no clue. And that's because 5 years ago, when Ryan Technologies started to grow faster than I could handle alone, I stepped away. I hired a trusted board, put a CEO in place, and became invisible to the public side of the business. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I needed a break. A break that ended up saving me for this exact moment. The breaking point came on a Thursday night. We were at a dinner with Jeff's work friends, all upper management at Ryan Technologies. Between the overpriced steak and the second bottle of wine, they started a game, worst employee you've ever seen. Jeff leaned back in his chair, smirked, and said, "My wife, Emily, can't keep a job to save her life. Not that she's tried." Laughter. Actual laughter. Even from people whose salaries existed because of my vision. I smiled, not because it was funny, but because I knew right then, the game was over. 2 weeks later, Ryan Technologies posted an opening for a mid-level project coordinator. A job I could do in my sleep. I applied under my maiden name. I crafted a simple resume, stripped of every accomplishment that could hint at who I was. The Emily Chan they would see on paper was quiet, unassuming, and desperate for work. The interview took place on the 14th floor, in a conference room I had personally designed years ago, down to the ridiculous shade of blue on the walls that the design team had called Optimistic Ocean. The hiring manager, Melissa, greeted me warmly, flipping through my resume as if it mattered. Halfway through the interview, I saw him. Jeff. He walked past the glass walls, chatting with a colleague, looking completely at home. He didn't see me. And even if he had, he wouldn't have recognized me right away. The glasses, the hair pulled back, the subtle change in posture. I'd made sure of it. Melissa asked why I wanted to work at Ryan Technologies. I smiled. I've always admired the company's vision. I think it's time I contributed to something that matters. It wasn't a lie. 3 days later, I got the call. I was hired. As I stepped into the lobby on my first official day, wearing my modest work clothes and carrying a plain black tote, I felt an almost electric surge in my chest. This wasn't just a job. This was the start of something much bigger. I wasn't just walking into Ryan Technologies as a new employee. I was walking in as its owner. And Jeff's reckoning had officially begun. The first thing I noticed when I started at Ryan Technologies was the tension. Not the healthy kind that drives innovation. This was the thick, suffocating kind that made people keep their heads down and their mouths shut. The place I had once built to be collaborative and inspiring now felt like a shark tank, and Jeff was swimming right in the center of it. From my little cubicle on the 12th floor, I could see him during meetings through the glass-walled boardroom. His voice would carry down the hall, loud, authoritative, and dripping with condescension. I watched the way people avoided making eye contact when he passed by. It was textbook Jeff. Charm the higher-ups, step on everyone else. My first weeks were about blending in. No unnecessary attention. I did my tasks flawlessly but never outshone anyone. Just another grateful to have a job employee. I kept my maiden name, avoided personal talk, and ate lunch alone in the break room. But while I kept a low profile, I was also taking mental notes. Melissa, my manager, was overworked and constantly cleaning up after sloppy projects from the operations department, Jeff's territory. Her frustration was polite but constant. Then there was Mark from accounting, who had a habit of muttering under his breath about executive bonuses every time payroll came around. And Rachel from HR, Well, she had a folder on her desk labeled pending complaints. It was thick. It didn't take long to learn that Jeff wasn't just arrogant. He was reckless. His inner circle, 3 other executives who also happened to be his drinking buddies, were just as bad. They'd approve expensive, half-baked initiatives that never delivered results, then push the fallout onto lower staff. On my 3rd week, fate handed me my first real weapon. Melissa asked me to compile a backlog of incomplete project reports from the last 2 years. The moment I opened the database, I found a mess. Millions in overspent budgets, vendor payments that didn't match contracts, and approvals signed off by, you guessed it, Jeff and his friends. Every file I opened was like adding another bullet to my chamber. Of course, I couldn't just walk into a board meeting and expose him. No. This needed to be slow, deliberate. I wanted Jeff to feel safe, smug even, right up until the moment the floor disappeared beneath him. So I started small. I stayed late, accidentally crossing paths with people who had grievances, casually asking questions without looking like I was asking questions. I offered to help Melissa with small admin tasks that gave me access to more files. I started a private log, names, dates, amounts, and most importantly, patterns. One afternoon, I was leaving the office when I overheard Jeff in the hallway, talking to one of his buddies. "She's sweet," he said about me, laughing. "Quiet. The kind who'll never move up, but she makes the coffee run on time." They both laughed. I didn't even blink. I just walked past them as if I hadn't heard a thing. Because the truth was, every time Jeff underestimated me, I won. By the end of my first month, I had everything I needed to confirm one thing. Jeff and his crew weren't just bad managers. They were liabilities. Financially. Legally. I'd built this company once. I could rebuild it again. But first, I had to burn down the rotten parts. The day I decided to move from gathering intel to setting the trap felt almost anticlimactic. No dramatic music, no lightning bolt of inspiration. Just me, sitting at my cubicle, scrolling through yet another inflated vendor invoice Jeff had approved. It was time. Step 1 was positioning myself. From the outside, it had to look like I was simply a helpful, loyal employee, someone eager to support management. From the inside, I was carefully threading a needle that would eventually stitch Jeff and his cronies into their own noose. I started volunteering for overflow work from the operations department, Jeff's department. Melissa was thrilled to hand it over. She was drowning in deadlines. This gave me access to internal emails, vendor contracts, and correspondence that rarely saw daylight outside their circle. And oh, the things I found. There were ghost vendors, companies that didn't exist outside of a P.O. box, receiving regular payments. There were expense reports with thousands spent on client entertainment that coincidentally lined up with Jeff's Vegas trips. And there were entire projects that had been signed off as complete, but had never even started. Every document went into a private, encrypted folder I kept on an external drive, not the company network. I wasn't about to risk tipping my hand too early. Step 2 was subtle influence. I began building quiet alliances with people who, in my day, had been the company's backbone, mid-level managers who kept the place from falling apart. I'd stop by their desks, ask about their projects, and without ever promising anything, let them vent. They told me stories about late payments to vendors, about Jeff taking credit for their work, about promotions dangled and then snatched away. The discontent was there. All I had to do was give it a direction. But I also needed proof that would hold up in front of the board. That meant getting close enough to Jeff's operations to catch him in the act. So I played the part he expected of me. Quiet. Helpful. A little self-effacing. I laughed at his jokes in the break room, brought him reports ahead of schedule, and never once let him see the satisfaction in my eyes when he dismissed me. Then came the opening I'd been waiting for. Jeff was scheduled to present quarterly figures to the board, a presentation I knew would be a minefield. The numbers were cooked. If anyone dug deeper, they'd see it. But Jeff was confident, because no one ever challenged him. I offered to help compile his presentation deck. He barely looked up from his phone when he agreed. That weekend, I worked late in my home office, pulling the real numbers, not the dressed-up ones Jeff planned to use. I prepared 2 versions of the deck, his fabricated one for the meeting, and the unvarnished truth for later. Step 3 was timing. You don't spring a trap too early, or your prey wriggles free. You wait until they're fully inside. And Jeff? He was strolling right in, whistling. The morning of the board meeting, I watched him stride into the conference room in his tailored suit, grinning like the king of the castle. He didn't even glance at me when I brought in the coffee. Good. The last thing I wanted was for him to suspect that the woman pouring his coffee was also quietly arranging the rope for his fall. I had the evidence. I had the allies. Now, I just needed one final push to make sure when Jeff fell, he took his entire rotten circle down with him. Board meetings at Ryan Technologies had always been a strange mix of ceremony and performance. Everyone wore their best masks, confident smiles, firm handshakes, and voices just loud enough to suggest authority. I used to sit at the head of that table years ago, steering conversations and making decisions that would shape the company's future. Now, I was invisible. Just the assistant in the corner, setting out coffee and making sure the projector worked. Jeff was in his element. He strutted into the boardroom with his executive crew trailing behind him like a bad parade. He slapped backs, cracked jokes, and tapped his fingers impatiently until everyone had taken their seats. "Let's get this started," he said, leaning back as though the outcome was already in his favor. He launched into his quarterly report with the polished arrogance I'd seen 100 times before. Only now, I knew every single success he bragged about was built on sand. His voice rose when he spoke about strategic investments and streamlined vendor relationships, the kind of vague phrases that sounded impressive until you looked at the numbers. Which, of course, no one ever did. Until now. Halfway through his presentation, one of the newer board members, Linda, a finance veteran I'd met years ago, interrupted. "Jeff, could you clarify the variance in vendor costs this quarter? It seems unusually high." I caught the flicker in his expression. Quick, almost imperceptible, before the practiced smile returned. "Just a matter of onboarding some new suppliers," he said smoothly. "We're expanding capacity." Linda didn't look convinced. She jotted something down in her notebook. And that was my cue. I walked over to the table, placing a folder next to the chair of Ryan Technologies chairman, Mr. Whitaker, an old friend of mine, though he didn't recognize me in my current guise. "These are the backup reports from operations," I said casually, "in case anyone wants the detailed breakdown." I felt Jeff's eyes on me for the first time that day. He didn't recognize me. Not yet. But there was a faint wrinkle between his brows, as if some small alarm bell was going off. Mr. Whitaker opened the folder and began flipping through the real numbers, the unpaid vendor accounts, the inflated invoices, the discrepancies that could not be explained away with corporate jargon. He passed it to Linda, who read in silence, her lips tightening. Jeff kept talking, his voice growing slightly sharper. He could sense the shift in the room, even if he didn't know why yet. By the time the meeting ended, there was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. People lingered, speaking in low voices. Jeff stalked out with his crew, their laughter forced. Later that afternoon, Melissa, my manager, whispered over my desk. "Whatever happened in there, you rattled them. Whitaker's been calling finance all afternoon." Good. That was the point. This wasn't the grand finale yet. This was just the first crack in Jeff's carefully constructed facade. The real reveal would come soon. And when it did, it wouldn't just be in front of the board. It would be in front of the entire company. I wanted Jeff Andrews to feel the humiliation he'd spent years serving to me. Only mine would be public, undeniable, and permanent. I just had to make sure he walked into it thinking he was untouchable. The email went out on a Monday morning, mandatory all-hands meeting, Wednesday, 10 a.m. attendance required. Jeff probably thought it was his chance to reassure the company after whatever whispers started circulating post-board meeting. What he didn't know was that the meeting was my idea and that I'd already spoken to the chairman and several key board members about exactly what was going to happen. I spent Tuesday evening at my desk on the 12th floor, finalizing two things, a presentation and a resignation letter. The resignation wasn't mine, of course. Wednesday arrived. The auditorium buzzed with low chatter as employees filed in. I stayed off to the side, pretending to fuss with the projector, my heart pounding in a slow, steady rhythm. This wasn't nerves. This was anticipation. Jeff strutted onto the stage, microphone in hand, flashing that same practiced grin. "I know there's been some confusion about our recent numbers," he began, And I want to set the record straight. Perfect. Let him dig the hole. He launched into his usual spin, throwing around terms like proactive restructuring and operational streamlining. The crowd listened politely, though I caught more than a few skeptical expressions. Then Mr. Whitaker stepped onto the stage. Jeff froze for half a second, surprised, before masking it. Whitaker took the microphone. Before we move forward, he said, we need full transparency. Some recent discoveries have raised serious concerns about operational integrity. The lights dimmed. My presentation appeared on the massive screen. Slide 1, side-by-side comparisons of Jeff's official numbers and the real numbers from finance. Slide 2, vendor invoices linked to non-existent companies. Slide 3, expense reports with trips, dinners, and client entertainment that coincided exactly with Jeff's personal getaways. Gasps rippled through the room. Jeff's jaw tightened, his face flushing red. Who compiled this? He demanded, his voice sharp. I stepped forward. Me, I said, my voice clear and steady. Emily Chan. There was a beat of silence before the name sank in. People turned to look at me, some with shock, some with dawning recognition. I continued, the founder and majority owner of Ryan Technologies. The company you've been running into the ground. The room erupted, whispers, shocked exclamations, the rustle of people turning to each other. Jeff actually laughed, though it sounded brittle. This is ridiculous. Whitaker cut him off. It's true. We've verified her ownership records and her original founding documents. Effective immediately, Jeff Andrews and his associated executives are terminated for cause. The security team, already waiting in the wings, stepped forward. Jeff's smirk collapsed into something raw, disbelief, maybe even fear, as they escorted him off the stage. I looked out at the employees. Ryan Technologies was built to be a place of innovation and respect, I said. That vision hasn't been honored in years. That changes today. There was applause, tentative at first, then stronger. The room felt lighter, like someone had finally opened a window. In the weeks that followed, the restructuring began. Toxic managers were replaced. Salaries were adjusted to reward real performance. Complaints long buried were addressed. Jeff and his circle, meanwhile, found themselves unemployable in the industry they'd once dominated. As for me, I didn't come back to the corner office. I stayed accessible on the floor where the real work happened. I'd fought too hard to rebuild this place to lock myself away again. And every now and then, when I passed that ridiculous shade of blue on the conference room walls, I smiled. Because I'd walked in as the invisible housewife Jeff thought he owned, and walked out having taken back everything he'd tried to steal from me. If you enjoyed my story, don't forget to like and hit subscribe. You will also enjoy other stories on AJ Family Drama. Until next time, bye.